There is a face in the Sistine Chapel that most visitors never find. It is not hidden in shadow, or buried in a crowd of figures, or placed in a corner where the light does not reach. It is near the center of the composition, in one of the most prominent positions in the most studied fresco in the history of Western art. Millions of people have looked directly at it. Almost none of them have recognized it for what it is. The face belongs to Michelangelo Buonarroti. And the reason most people do not recognize it is that it is not attached to a body, it is a piece of skin. The Last Judgment covers the entire altar wall of the Sistine Chapel and was painted between 1536 and 1541, more than 20 years after Michelangelo completed the ceiling. He was 61 years old when Pope Paul III commissioned it. He was 66 when it was unveiled. The fresco is enormous, 14 meters tall, 13 meters wide, and depicts the moment of Christian eschatology in which Christ returns to judge the living and the dead. In the upper register, the blessed ascend. In the lower, the damned are dragged down. At the center, Christ stands with his arm raised, and around him the saints press close, each holding the instrument of their martyrdom, the wheel, the cross, the arrows. Saint Bartholomew stands just below and to the left of Christ. He holds two things. In his left hand, a knife. In his right hand, the skin of the man who was flayed alive, the skin that was peeled from his body as the method of his execution. The skin hangs loose, human-shaped, a hollow version of the man. The face on that skin is Michelangelo's own. The identification was made by scholars in the 19th century and has been accepted by the field ever since. It is confirmed by comparison with Michelangelo's known portraits and by the physiognomic specificity of the face. Older, deeply lined, recognizably distinct from the generalized features of the figures around it. The face was clearly individualized, clearly deliberate. Why he did it is a question with no single answer. Michelangelo was 61 when he began the work. He had spent his life under the direct command of popes and patrons, perpetually assigned to projects on scales that should have broken most artists. The Sistine ceiling alone had taken 4 years, during which he worked on scaffolding that left him unable to stand straight. He described that period in a letter. His beard pointed toward heaven, his eyes could not look downward without distress, his spine had bent. He finished it. He was then assigned the tombs of the Medici, the design of a library, the commission for Moses, the commission for the Last Judgment. The man who climbed the scaffolding in 1536 was not the man who had carved the David at 26. He was old, in pain, and acutely aware of what had been spent. Saint Bartholomew's martyrdom was understood by Renaissance audiences as a particular kind of suffering, not simply death, but the complete stripping away of the self, the skin removed from the living body, the man continuing without the outer form he had inhabited. It was this specificity that made Bartholomew a figure of such theological weight. The question his martyrdom posed was not merely whether you would die for your faith, but whether you could be unmade by it and still hold. Michelangelo placed his own face on the discarded portion, not on the saint, on the skin. The Bartholomew who holds it is whole, muscular, powerful, positioned close to the seat of judgment. He has passed through his ordeal and arrived somewhere. The skin is what was left behind, what was used and emptied and is now being displayed. Between the two figures, the equation is precise. I am not the saint, I am the skin. The Last Judgment generated immediate controversy. The nudity of the figures, Christ, the apostles, the ascending and descending souls, offended members of the Curia. Biagio da Cesena, the Pope's master of ceremonies, complained publicly that the fresco was more appropriate to a bathhouse or a tavern than to the Pope's chapel. Michelangelo's response was permanent. He painted da Cesena into the lower corner of the fresco, in hell, as the figure of Minos, the judge of the underworld. He gave him donkey ears. He wrapped a serpent around him, with the serpent's head positioned at his groin. When da Cesena complained to the Pope replied that his jurisdiction did not extend to hell, and the figure stayed. Michelangelo understood the power of the wall. What he made there could not be argued with, could not be answered, could not be removed without destroying the fresco itself. He used that power twice in the Last Judgment, once in public revenge on a minor official and once quietly for something that required more than a letter or a poem to say. In 1564, following the conclusion of the Council of Trent, Pope Pius IV commissioned Daniele da Volterra to paint draperies over the nude figures in the Last Judgment. Da Volterra became known as Il Braghettone, the breeches maker, and spent years adding cloth to figures Michelangelo had left bare. Further overpainting continued under later popes, and full restorations of the fresco over the centuries have been careful to preserve as much of the original as possible, while reversing the worst of the additions. Michelangelo had died that same year, 1564, at the age of 88. His body was buried in Rome, then secretly transported to Florence by his nephew, hidden under goods in a merchant's wagon, and reinterred at the Basilica di Santa Croce, where it remains. The skin, the face in the center of the fresco, stayed exactly where he put it. The Last Judgment has been studied more intensively than almost any other work in Western art. Scholars have catalogued every figure, traced every source, mapped every theological argument and personal allusion embedded in the composition. The self-portrait is well documented. It appears in textbooks. It is pointed out in guided tours. People who have been told what to look for can find it, but most visitors to the Sistine Chapel are looking up. They are looking at the ceiling, at Adam's outstretched hand, at the hand extending toward it, at the central image that has become one of the most reproduced in human history. The altar wall, with its hundreds of figures and its tremendous complexity, is harder to read from the floor below. The face in the skin is small. It is located close to the center of a scene designed around absolute judgment. There is a question worth sitting with, standing in that chapel and knowing where to look. Michelangelo spent 67 years in service to the church and to the men who commanded it. He was assigned tasks, completed them, assigned again, grew old in the execution of other people's visions. He carved David for a city. He painted Genesis for a pope. He painted the Last Judgment for another. He designed buildings and tombs and libraries for families whose names are still spoken and whose commissions he did not choose. And somewhere in the middle of the largest and most public work of his life, he placed his own face on a piece of discarded skin and positioned it near the throne of judgment. Whether that was despair or protest or the kind of private statement that can only survive when it is sewn into something too large and too sacred to be undone, he left the decision to whoever was standing close enough to look.